Welcome to the Italian Renaissance podcast, where we discuss the culture and art of 15th and 16th century Italy. I'm your host, Lawrence Gianangeli. Andiamo avanti. Renaissance people, welcome back to the Italian Renaissance podcast. I'm about to play for you the continuation of my interview with the ecocritical art historian Esme Garlake. This is part 2. It's going to pick up rather abruptly. So if you haven't listened to the first part of the interview about Giulio Romano and what ecocritical art history is, I urge you to go back and listen to the first part of this interview. Previously, we talked predominantly about Giulio Romano, one of Raphael's pupils. We are going to continue this conversation about the followers of Raphael via Giovanni da Udine and his work in the Villa Farnesina. And we're going to conclude the interview by discussing some of the recent climate activism that's taken place inside of museum spaces and to try to get some perspectives on that. My dear Renaissance people, I present to you again with great pleasure, Esme Garlake. Should we look at Giovanni da Udine?
Yeah, I think it's really useful to look at him in comparison. So Giovanni da Udine is really interested in observing animals from life. And he has been kind of, Giulio Romano's animals have been touched on as symbols, yes, as status symbols, classical symbols kind of thing, but never really thinking so much about the actual animals themselves as real beings. By contrast, art historians are fascinated with Giovanni da Udine because he was drawing from life. So he's often been held up, even recently, as being a nature lover. It's his appreciation for the natural world that was the thing that fueled his interest in animals. I would argue that may have been it, but also, as we've seen, naturalism was closely connected to classical ideals and the idea of the classical artist looking at nature, right, and depicting it very realistically. So I wouldn't say Giovanni da Udine was a nature lover per se. He was very much of his time, and he was also employed in Raphael's workshop as the specialist to paint animals and flora. So he also came from Venice. So that was where apparently he met Albrecht Dürer in 1506 as a young artist. And Albrecht Dürer was heralded as one of the best at depicting animals in a hyper-realistic way. So yeah, I suppose as an example of this kind of, is Giovanni da Udine really an animal lover, would be this image of Lawrence, do you want to describe this? I feel it's
so what we're looking at, folks, is a series of drawings. And is this what kind of pigment is used for these?
It's pen and brown ink, red and black chalk, and also watercolors. So it's a mishmash.
So it's so on one side we sort of have a parrot with these sort of splotches all around it, but the other is birds in different stages of life. It looks like we're in the very top. We just have, it looks like an ink sketch of 2 dead birds. I can't tell if one of these is showing through from the other side or if there's 2 on the.
Those 2 are both on the same side, actually. Yeah.
It's just the parrot we're seeing. So this is the recto and verso, each side of this one folio. So yeah, it just seems to be a study. Nothing like
exactly. Yeah. And so what's interesting is we can kind of tell that at least some of these sketches are done from life. With Giulio Romano, we couldn't really tell. It's looking realistic, but it's also, here we see around, we can see quite a lot. We can see some sketches that are far less finished. And if anyone's ever tried to draw an animal, I think you kind of know, when I try and draw my cat, he'll move quite quickly. So there is parts of this that you can see where there are just some zigzags, It's almost like Giovanni da Udine has started and then had to stop because the animals moved. We also do know that Giovanni da Udine probably had access to the papal menagerie around this period when he was in Raphael's workshop, which would have had parrots from both Asia and also I think around Mexico. These were some of the first. And the reason that I'm so fascinated by this, though, is that this is heralded as, oh, well, look, he's drawing them from life. But actually, we do see these dead birds in it as well. And they're lying on their front, their wings are outstretched, their beaks are open. And I really think we do have to be mindful of speaking about images of animals and acknowledging whether these come from dead or alive animals, because we could just say, well, he loves nature, but I wouldn't say it's I'd say he loves getting naturalistic images of nature. I wouldn't say, drawing a dead bird particularly shows much compassion for it. And that's not a moral judgment. I just think, it's doing something different.
Yeah, it's this sort of like late 15th century idea about the emulation of nature actually not being the relationship between the artist and nature, but the artist and divinity. So it's more of a selfish sort of proclamation of ability as an act of some sort of divine oversight. I don't know about Giovanni da Udine, but this is a lot of the kind of philosophical rhetoric about naturalism in the 15th century.
Yeah, I think definitely, and increasingly the idea of the art nature divide, and this is what I'm kind of trying to get my head around with my PhD research, is that it's a very complicated relationship between the idea of the artist and the idea of God, and then nature comes into that as a kind of, how does the artist have work? There's quite often the idea that the artist surpasses nature. The artist has done even better, so they're closer to God. And then other times that's kind of blasphemous to say.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's definitely a strange. And I suppose that's why I said near the beginning, you often have more questions than answers with this, because it is so fluid. The idea, even how I've been saying natural world, well, what natural world means in the early 16th century in Italy or in Europe, that's going to mean very different things to now. So that's down the line for my research, but I think I do think it's certainly a useful tool. For one aspect is it's a useful tool for us to train ourselves looking at images of animals and the natural world in general from the Italian Renaissance, because we do start to see that there are dead animals, there are captive animals. Okay, this is not as pristine and idealized as we might have thought. And I do kind of want to emphasize that I think we should be taking that into our own lives as well, as, thinking we're nature lovers and then we might eat meat. And there's a kind of strange imbalance in that.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Renaissance people, if you are enjoying the Italian Renaissance podcast, I have good news. We're now active on Patreon. You can show your love for the show by becoming a patron and get access to additional resources, information, and artworks. Better yet, those who join the Renaissance Master or Renaissance Patron tier will get access to at least one additional podcast episode each month. My goal is to ensure that the main podcast remains a free, accessible source for everyone. Become a patron today through the link in the show notes to support the continued production of new episodes and help build and maintain this community. The Italian Renaissance shop is now also active on Etsy, linked in the show notes. Sport our logo or choose from a growing selection of Italian art-inspired designs. Discounts are offered to select Patreon tiers as well. Your support has my immortal gratitude. Now, enjoy the show. Do we have some more artworks we want to look at before I jump into the next question? Is there any?
Yeah, I would like to emphasize this ram that's a chalk sketch by Giovanni da Udine, and I absolutely love this. I've seen this in person at the Courtaulds print collection and prints and drawings collection. And what I love about this is the character of the ram that comes through. It's a sketch of a ram looking at the viewer, who we can take to be Giovanni da Udine. And I love here that, you know, there's a reminder that, okay, I mean, I know I've been emphasizing, you know, oh, these are dead animals and they're exploited and captive, but I do think it's important to recognize as well that it's a two-way street between an animal and a human. And this gaze of the ram looking at us it reminds us that there are some art historians. Sugata Ray is an art historian at the moment who's spoken quite a lot about the idea of agency, of an animal having agency, or at least kind of working on us in some way, having an impact on us and having an impact on the art.
So I guess just in terms of, I've got other questions
for
you about this, but I would like us to just talk about the Farnesina a little bit.
Yes.
Just so people are aware, I did mention the Villa Farnesina is visited for the Raphael fresco of Galatea. That is what people typically like to go and visit. There's this magnificent motif of floral and vegetal decorations that some of this comes from the so-called, and I don't have a better term for this, the so-called New World. The American continent has been, but Esme, please.
No, I mean, I think, I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but the New World is certainly how it was referred to at the time.
I believe so.
Yeah, and I mean, so yeah, as I said at the beginning, this was very much a collaborative piece. I mean, looks huge. You've been there, have you, Lawrence?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I'm very jealous. Yeah. But it's very big. It's a loggia. So you're walking through it, and the tall ceilings are there, but it's got these vegetal borders, which Giovanni da Udine was in charge of. And it's a kind of extension of the gardens outside. And these borders are green and full of a huge range of flora and vegetation. And so we have an image here of a melon, but you've got maize, which is from the Caribbean at that point, I think. And you have a huge range. And what I was interested in again was thinking about lots of things about this, but if we're thinking eco-critically about this, we're thinking about how, again, natural resources are being used as a status symbol of, so the patron of this was a Sienese banker, Agostino Chigi, and he really was showing his wealth here. It's a kind of, it's flash, it's parading all of this wealth, but also thinking about even today we have the association of the abundance of nature will be a kind of it's I suppose, well, we're obsessed with the idea of infinite growth is kind of here. It's the idea that the earth is just going to provide us with bountiful plentiful resources, and we can just keep taking it. And so this visually, as we walk in, as I hope to do, but I imagine, Lawrence, it happened, you're kind of overcome with this sense of abundance, and it's almost like being in nature in some way. It's a similar kind of reaction, I suppose.
That's exactly it. Like spatially, it, like you mentioned, it does feel like the continuation of the garden space. But also, I mean, you are immediately struck by what I would say, I can't think of any other examples, especially at this moment, extremely unique application of vegetal motifs as the actual frames of each individual series. So this is a whole ceiling and arches full of frescoes, and each individual scene is wrapped in a sort of vine-like wreath of abundance, and it is immediately striking as so. What would you say?
No, I mean, I think
Difficult.
also what's interesting is this is just I found this fascinating when I was researching this this loggia, because Raphael was using so many assistants in his in his workshop, that these borders, they really create a unifying effect. So they're also a practical use, that they are used practically to bring together all of these pieces. It gives it a unity. And I think what I'm also, another thing that I'd like to note is, so there are also within the arches around the human figures, which Giulio Romano would have been helping to work on, there are also loads of birds, and they are realistic. Here's some of them that you see: a blackbird, an owl, a hoopoe.
Oh, don't ask me.
I'm a bird watcher, so I should. That's again pronunciation. It's ridiculous, but I think it's again really interesting, because here we see, at least with the blackbird, it looks quite similar to the dead figure that we saw earlier, the dead bird.
Right.
It's got its beak open, its wings are out wide open. It doesn't really look up close like an alive bird, but the effect is that we walk in and we see all of these birds, and they're realistically done, and we think, oh my goodness, this is just teeming with life. And it's a kind of just a strange trick in a way that's being played. And I think we do have to be attentive when looking at images of nature, of natural abundance, to think, okay, but really in reality, what were the humans doing with this nature, with these animals? And it's bringing that together. It's not, it's not fully exploitative, but it's not fully, celebratory either. And, again, like, this is a period of time where collecting, Cabinet of Curiosities is coming up as well. I don't know, the kind of idea of collecting nature. And this is, it's all part of it. So I feel like it's just a very rich period for thinking about, animals, the natural world. Beyond just being symbols, I suppose, of,
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good. I think this was a good treatment of the subject. I've got, unless if you've got anything left that you really want to talk about, image-wise, art-wise, otherwise, said wise too many times. I'm going to transition into this final couple of questions.
Yeah, I think let's go for the questions. Yeah.
Perfect. So I have this quote here by you, and you have this this blog piece, and you say that ecocritical art history is about developing a dose of cynicism when looking at art. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through the importance of cynicism in both academic and general terms. What does the common viewer bring to these? And I don't mean common, the general viewer bring to these. How can healthy cynicism through an eco-critical perspective be a way for people to integrate into their viewership practices?
Yeah, I think the reason I say cynicism is because when we look at, well, we almost don't look at animals or trees or what we could under the category of the natural world. We don't really think about these aspects critically. So they become part in art. I mean, so they become part of the margins, or they become animals that we love. Often in paintings are dogs or cats. That's fine, but we don't go beyond into thinking, I suppose. When I say cynically, I mean humans have always had power over animals, and so we are in what we would say an anthropocentric world and view, which is this centering the human. So seeing, we now technically are in the Anthropocene, in the a geological era which is made by man and humankind. So I think when I say having a dose of cynicism, I mean being aware that when we, as humans, we are looking at man-made art, and we won't necessarily automatically recognize the non-human in that, whether that's plants or animals. And particularly, we're very, very good at ignoring those dynamics today in the context of the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. So again, I suppose my involvement in climate activism has shown me that, yeah, you can't really look at nature without a bit of cynicism, without a bit of critical engagement. So I suppose just the next time you see a painting, think okay, where does nature come into this? Or are there any animals here? How is the artist using it? And what's the emotional effect on me as well, I think, as a modern viewer. Yeah.
Lovely. So I have this final question, and anyone who's listening to an art history podcast, in all likelihood, is well aware of the way climate activism is inhabiting gallery spaces. And I'm sure a lot of people have opinions on the utility of that, or might even perceive what's happening as violence. Was I particularly personally struck when, what did they put, mayonnaise or birthday cake on the Mona Lisa, something white and
Oh yeah, well that one was a strange one, because I don't think that is, yeah.
No, that wasn't okay. Listen, okay,
no, I mean that was, but it was a kind of so I mean, this is being pedantic about it. That was much more of an individual case rather than a climate group.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That was strange. That was strange.
Right. What? But you, like I said, so you're involved with Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and Fossil Free London, who, as far as I'm aware, have occupied museum spaces to make points about climate change and the relationship between the museum, the relationship between the conservation of art and futurity of this practice. Can you speak to, in that I don't like the hammering of that was a little bit too aggressive for my personal taste, but I believe this is an important way to make critical point about this relationship, art, spectatorship, futurity of the planet. Can you kind of talk us through your ideas about this?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, first of all, to be clear about the groups doing it, Just Stop Oil in the UK are the only ones who have done that. Extinction Rebellion and Fossil Free London and any other group haven't done that. But of course they do get all mixed into one by the media. I think that those of us who consider ourselves, professionals in the art world, or art historians, or people who really their love of art also it extends into professional and personal life, and obviously that's a big spectrum, but many of us, those of you listening, will I'm sure consider yourselves stewards of art. So I think we can have a very strong emotional reaction to it, and see it as a direct attack on our values and our mission to protect art. So I think what we do need to, hopefully, I would say the first thing to do is to, I suppose, try and not let the emotion stop conversations from happening around it, because I think I've had people say, I personally, I was very upset by the Rokeby Venus particularly, because of that hammering which happened recently. I didn't know what to make of it, had to sit with it for a few days, but when I said that I supported it in general, I had people online saying you shouldn't be an art historian. And I think, well, for me, wanting to conserve art, it really, the climate crisis, and I know this is said many times, that the climate crisis is a far bigger threat to art and art history and all that we love as art historians than climate activists. and I think, you know, individual artworks are currently being attacked, but we're talking about institutions at threat from the climate crisis, and we've seen that. I mean, this summer, the Acropolis being closed in Greece, people not being able to access art, museums closing due to heat waves, lots and lots of examples of that. But I do think that, you know, it goes to show how emotional and how closely we hold art. And for me, the reason that I am doing I'm doing research into eco-critical art history is because I want the art world to be part of the conversations around the climate and ecological crises. You know, I think that we do have a duty, actually, as people who love, I see art historians and people who love art as the people who celebrate human creativity and hope. And there's such hope in art history because we learn so much, we have such creative conversations, and that's what we need. We don't just in solutions for the climate crisis. And I want there to be a, you know, a cultural shift as well as a technological shift in that sense. And I think, as uncomfortable as it makes us, these attacks, I do think that we can use our voices to say, well, maybe museums need to stop, you know, having ties with fossil fuel companies and fossil fuel banks, and maybe they need to start really treating this as a threat. Yeah, I don't know what you think of that, Lawrence.
No, you know, I found some what I think it highlights the actual centrality of our art institutions, that they can be such a critical platform for outrage, either for or against the types of protests that are happening there. I was more assured when I was reading a little bit, I don't really read a whole lot about this, but about the techniques that some organizations use to ensure that they're not actually damaging any art. But can you really control that when you know, my idea is it's a great platform. And yes, certainly, if our climate issues are not actively and aggressively treated, we won't be able to view any art. But in that capacity, nor should we should avoid any active damaging. I think so far, like besides, like we said, this sort of hammering, there hasn't been anything that's been to the actual detriment to the pieces. It's more of a point that I think is being getting the type of publicity it deserves, and we'll have people thinking about things.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember, a lot of people say, well, why are they targeting artworks when they should be targeting oil companies, or they should be targeting the banks, or, you know, and they do. That's the thing, they do. But it doesn't get the media attention. So the same day that the Van Gogh sunflowers had soup thrown over the glass, I was outside the National Gallery on a protest. Nobody heard about the protest, which had far more people there. And I do think, you know, climate activists are not going to stop, because we can't. There really isn't. We really, like you say, we have to have the drastic, immediate changes, which we know, you know, that it needs to be shift to renewables but in terms of where art, the role that I see art historians as playing is we have skills, not just skills, but we have a like I said, kind of faith in humanity. And I do think that actually the climate activists doing this, they do understand the value of art. It's not a blind, it's not a binary between the people. Climate activists attacking art don't understand art, and if only they understood art, they would not do it. That's certainly not the case. And I think, you know, I want my children to be able to see the art that I have loved, you know. And so for me, while I won't be, I mean, that if you do damage artworks, you are banned from museums. So I certainly won't be doing this, because I do go on protests, and I do take part in direct action.
Asked to leave for wearing a button, didn't you? Was that?
Yes. I did
Yeah.
get asked to leave the National Gallery for wearing my Extinction Rebellion badge, which ironically, as I say, Extinction Rebellion have not done any of the art attacks, at least in the UK. I'm not sure about international groups. But as soon as I said, well, I'm an art historian, he completely relaxed. And I think that's really interesting, that it's the idea that, well, I'm a climate activist and an art historian. That is not mutually exclusive, you know. So yeah, I had to say, you know, I support the attacks or the kind of actions in museums, and I also dedicate my life to studying these artworks. So it's a kind of, I think, yeah, it's quite powerful when people in the art world say, I actually see that there's a bigger picture going on, and that the climate, I think we really have to start talking about the climate crisis as a much bigger threat to artworks than climate activists. And also, you know, I wrote into Google climate activist, what was it? It was climate crisis damage artworks or something, and it was all about climate activists. It wasn't about the floods in northern Italy in May this year, that, you know, churches were flooded and archives. It wasn't that. So yeah, but I did manage to stay in the National Gallery with my badge, and I since go every time with my Just Stop Oil badge. But there is also, yeah, quite a sinister clampdown on protests in the UK now.
Yeah.
So this is the time that we really need people to, you know, use their voices, really. And, anywhere. So I think I'll go to the National Gallery for the day, and I'll take my Just Stop Oil badge, because actually a badge is okay. I'm not taking a hammer, I promise.
Esme, I would like to thank you so much for joining us.
It's been so lovely to talk.
And I just want to reiterate very clearly that I think people listening who have had a sort of guttural or visceral reaction to climate protest in the museum space should consider thinking through that reaction to the more sort of critical perspective that these activists are actually taking. It's not just what would we say, a blatant attack. There is a very important point here that we should all be working on thinking through, as opposed to explicitly condemning right off the bat based on how we react to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And also thinking that increasingly art historians will also be climate activists. So, you know, it's one of the same in the end.
Yeah. Well, Esme, thank you so much. Let's say goodbye to our viewers.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely. Right. Take care. Bye.
Ciao.